So I've heard that you want to become a lawyer, but take it from somebody who's a lawyer who isn't working anymore in law. Here are 3 questions that you need to ask yourself before committing to law school and a career as a lawyer. And I just want you guys to know, in making this video, I'm not trying to deter you guys from going to law school, because when I was in your position, okay, in undergrad, taking the LSAT, getting my law school applications ready, no matter how many lawyers told me to not go to law school, there is no way I would listen to them. I had my eyes on the prize. I was going to law school. So I'm being 100% serious when I say I am not trying to deter you from going to law school, but what I am trying to do is give you the information, tools, resources so that you can make an informed decision about whether or not law school is right for you. So that is the purpose of today's video. And what are my credentials to even talk about this? Well, to give a little bit of background on me, I did my undergrad at Queen's University in Kingston. I did a philosophy undergrad. Straight from undergrad, I went to law school. I went to UofT Law. After law school, I articled at a national firm. I was hired back. I practiced tax, specifically tax litigation, for a couple of years. After that, I worked in the nonprofit sector where I practiced employment law under a specialized community project. In total, I worked as a lawyer for 5 years and I ultimately stopped because A, I was burned out, very, very burned out. Why was I so burned out? Well, law, inherently a burnout industry, and on top of that, I was doing content creation on the side. But at one point, while I was still practicing law, content also became a full-time job, so I was trying to juggle 2 full-time jobs. That led to my eventual burnout. And so I decided to take a break from law and just pursue content creation full-time. So I've been doing content full-time for a year and a half now. Initially, I was planning to just do it for a year, but here we are. And even though I'm a full-time content creator now, I definitely don't regret going to law school or working as a lawyer. But that being said, what I do wish is that I had more information and understanding of what being a lawyer practically, what it looked like as a career before I committed to becoming a lawyer. So that kind of information that I wish I had is what I'm trying to give you in these videos. So back to today's topic of discussion. Here are 3 questions you need to ask yourself and adequately answer before you commit to going to law school and becoming a lawyer. Before we get to question number 1, that little girl. Side note, I love this stuff. It's the Caudalie Beauty Elixir. Oh my god. But okay, Jules, enough is enough. What are these 3 questions I have to ask myself before going to law school? Number 1, what is your why? AKA, why do you want to go to law school and be a lawyer? And more importantly, does going to law school accomplish your why? So that's it. That's the first question. What is your why? But more importantly, does going to law school accomplish that why? And is that why a good enough reason to go to law school? So let me illustrate this with my own experience. I decided to go to law school when I was in grade 11 after taking a law class. And why I decided to become a lawyer in grade 11 was, well, I liked my law class that I took a lot better than all the other classes that I took. Didn't like chem, didn't like physics. English was okay, but there was something about law. I remember we studied the R.V. Bedford case, a landmark Supreme Court case, and I was just enthralled with the subject matter. So I went to university with that plan. I Googled what is the top degree to get before going to law school. Number 1, I think, was physics. If I recall correctly. That was out of the question, was not doing a physics degree. Number 2 was philosophy. I was like, okay, I'll do philosophy. So that's how I chose my undergrad. And then halfway through my undergrad, when I really started to actually think about applying to law school seriously and, you know, actioning those application steps that you have to take, like writing the LSAT in particular, you know, I thought more about why I wanted to go to law school. And at that point, my why was, well, what else am I going to do with a philosophy degree? Another one of my whys was I really liked school. I thought the subject matter studied in law school would be very interesting, which I was correct about. It was very interesting. I thought about continuing my education in other ways before law school, like going to do a philosophy's master's, but I thought by getting a master's in philosophy, I would just be delaying the inevitable because I did eventually want to go to law school. Another one of my whys was I thought being a lawyer would be prestigious. When you hear hear lawyer, you think, oh, she's smart, she's accomplished. Another one of my whys was I thought I would be really financially secure if I was a lawyer. I thought it was a good way to make a lot of money. And now being 30 and having gone through the law school process and practicing as a lawyer, looking back, I know that my whys at the time, they were not good enough to actually go to law school. And there's really no way I could have known that at the time. I was so young trying to make this decision. Just considering my first why, one of the reasons why I ended up going to law school was because I thought there was nothing else I could do with my philosophy degree. And while there may not have been directly anything I could have done, there aren't really many job postings for philosophers these days, definitely could have gotten a job, in another industry using those skills. I was a good writer, I was a good communicator, I had a good work ethic, and even though it may have been hard to pivot to another industry to get a job, it could have been done, and law school wasn't my only option, even though at the time it felt like it was. And my second why, the prestige factor, to choose a career because it is viewed as prestigious by society is not a good enough reason to embark on that career. And I definitely didn't feel prestigious doing a doc review for 12 hours a day. My other why was I thought I would be really financially secure as a lawyer, and there is definitely a pathway to that, but I thought, and I've made videos on this, that when I became a lawyer, that was it. I was going to be rich. But because of the high cost of tuition at law school and the somewhat stagnant salaries in the legal industry, the pathway to financial security, it's not as direct anymore as it once was. And that's just not something I really understood before becoming a lawyer. So that is the first question that you need to ask yourself. What is your why? And will that why be accomplished by going to law school? And once you come up with your why, I would talk about it. Talk about it with law students, with lawyers, if you can connect with them. Because, if you can accomplish your why without having to go to law school, because law school, you want to avoid it if you don't have to go. And now for the second question you need to ask yourself, and this one is pretty important, almost as important as your why. But before getting into that, we first need some energy. All this law talk is exhausting. Now, the second question you need to ask yourself before you commit to law school and a potential career as a lawyer is, do you know what a lawyer does? Which may almost seem like a ridiculous question to ask, because obviously you should know what a lawyer actually does before you commit to a career as a lawyer, but that is definitely not the case, even for me. I really had no idea what a lawyer actually did before I committed to going to law school. And you need to know what a lawyer does in order to make an informed decision about whether or not that's something that you want to do for your career. When I made the decision to go to law school, I truly had no idea what a lawyer actually did, and I think that was a product of the time. Currently, because of social media, we have a lot of law talk, law YouTuber, law influencers, so they give us a better look at what it's like to actually be a lawyer. But back in my day, we didn't have that, and unless you knew lawyers personally, which I didn't, the perception of what it was like to be a lawyer was really influenced by lawyers on TV. I saw Suits and was like, oh my god, I'll be Jessica. Okay, that looks good. I like her outfit. Now, how do you find out what a lawyer actually does? So you're gonna have to get resourceful here. You can schedule coffee chats with lawyers who are in a practice area that you think you might like. You can look online, social media. There are now a lot of law talk influencers chronicling their, days as lawyers. And once you have an understanding of what it is that a lawyer actually does, this brings us to question number 3 that you need to ask yourself before you commit to law school and being a lawyer. So now that you know what a lawyer does, because you did all your research, the last question you need to to ask and answer for yourself is that really what you want to do for your career? The realities of the day-to-day practice of law, is that what you really want your career to be? And I'm not saying the answer should be yes or no. That's an individual choice. Not to speak for every lawyer, maybe I can just speak to my experience. From my experience, what I found to be true about the day-to-day practice of law was, number one, it's very stressful. And I mean extremely stressful. There are lawyers who go to court and lawyers who do not go to court. I was a lawyer who went to court, but I don't know why I thought it would be a good idea to pick a profession that involved possibly having to, you know, give oral submissions in front of a judge, in front of the court, in front of the client who's probably sitting right behind you. That is extremely stressful. And for that to be just a constant in your career, and of course you're not in court every day. Well, some lawyers are, like criminal lawyers are. And speaking to my time in corporate, your billable hourly rate, it's very, very high. Clients are paying a lot of money for your expertise, your knowledge. And for that reason, you know, you have to bring your A game almost every day to ensure that your clients are happy and you are, you know, providing the adequate level of legal services. And that is a lot of pressure. And I feel like I felt that pressure, especially because I was a young lawyer. I'm sure as you move up, as you become an expert in the subject area that you practice, some of that day-to-day pressure would probably be alleviated because you have developed those skills. But at the beginning, it was really tough. Another thing about working in law is that it's not a job, or at least in my experience, it was not a kind of job that you left at the office. Even when I wasn't at my desk working, I was always thinking about work. Maybe that was partly a me problem. I maybe needed to develop better separation and boundaries between work and personal life, but it almost seems impossible in law, especially working at a firm. When you're a young lawyer, especially when you're starting out, your main asset to the firm is your availability. And you are expected to be available, not at all times, but often. And because of that expectation of availability, it is really hard to just commit to things during the week even. Like if you wanted to play, I don't know, intramural volleyball on Tuesday nights at 7:30. When I was working at a firm, there is no way. When I was working at a firm, there was just no way that would ever be possible. Or if I could make it possible, I would just be so stressed out during the time I was playing volleyball. So you have to think, is that something that you really want for your life? I found when I was working in private practice, I had no hobbies because you don't really have time to cultivate any hobbies. All I did was work and all I had to talk about was work. And another thing that I haven't really heard any other lawyers talk about online, at least, is the way going to law school and the practice of law changes your worldview and the way you go about your day-to-day life in the world. For example, I had a friend, she's a lawyer, and she did personal injury law. And a lot of files that she took on involved car accidents where there were injuries. And she told me that now when she gets into a car, she's anxious because her status quo, her frame of reference, are just all of these horrible car accidents. So that's, you know, percolating in the back of her mind as she's driving, causing anxiety. Or like for me, a common example is, you know, whenever you're confronted with like terms and conditions or something you have to sign in order to do an activity like snowboarding, for example, I'm like, I know I shouldn't sign this waiver form or agree to these terms, but like, I really want to do this activity. But knowing what I know, reading these terms, how can I just like sign away all these rights? Would even these provisions be enforceable? Would it even come to that? Should I just sign it, not have to worry about it? Nothing's likely going to happen. What if the unlikely occurs? Because it does sometimes. Then what? Maybe I could argue that I didn't understand the terms, but then the opposing counsel will be like, well, she's a lawyer. How could she not understand the terms? And she signed it, so right's gone. You know, you're having this internal meltdown in your head as you're on the chairlift, just trying to, you know, enjoy a nice relaxing ski day. So yeah, that happens, you know, when you go to law school and become a lawyer. Are you ready for that? Are you ready to possibly having to work during your vacation? Are you ready to not take vacation or feel bad about taking vacation or getting your vacation interrupted because apparently this factum needs to be drafted and you're the only one who can draft it, and you end up having to pull an all-nighter back to back on your vacation? Your now husband was actually trying to propose on that vacation and he couldn't because you were exhausted, because you had to pull these all-nighters, because you had to draft this backed up. Are you ready for that? So again, even though it sounds like I'm deterring you from going to law school, I genuinely am not trying to. I know how strong-willed you prospective law students are, so I doubt any of this is going to deter you anyways. What I am trying to do is just, give you the tools and information such that you can make an informed decision about whether going to law school is right for you. And I hope this video in part did that. Comment below if it did. And my advice to people considering law school is always going to be there. It is not going away. If you think there's something else you want to do career-wise and you are trying to decide between that career or going to law school, my advice is always try that career first. It's so hard once you've gone to law school and start practicing as a lawyer to leave law. And that's because it's so hard to re-enter once you've left. So it is much easier to try that alternate career because chances are once you go through, that extensive process to finally become a lawyer, maybe you have some law school debt that you need to pay off. And because of that barrier to re-entering the legal profession, it will be much harder to go back and say, oh, maybe I would have liked to actually try that alternate career that I never got to try because I went to law school. So that's always my advice to people considering law or something else. Try the something else. I hope this video has been helpful. I really do have a soft spot for students, prospective law students. I know it's such a hard time. There's so much uncertainty and it feels like every decision you make is so important and you want to make sure that you don't make the wrong decision, but then you don't know if you're making the wrong decision. So if there's any other questions I can answer for you guys on your career journey, just let me know in the comments. I'm happy to make more videos like this. But yeah, that's today's video. Comment below if you thought this was helpful and any other questions that you have for me. And as always, I'll see you next Tuesday.